All right, my English teacher friends, welcome to another writing workshop video with yours truly, Christian Kuhn, affectionately known as the Bob Ross of composition. So I got a strange one for you, super left field, a little unorthodox. We're going to focus on teaching line of reasoning, and the subtitle of this workshop is Bringing the Band Back Together, and I'm going to use my focus template yet again, and we're going to be analyzing song lyrics. There's a background story to the impetus and kind of the genesis of this template. And I'll tell you this, a kind of a prophetic statement. I think this year I taught a future president of the United States of America, literally the smartest kid I've ever taught in 21 years of doing this. And in my end of the year evaluation, I allowed the students to kind of assess me as a teacher, give me a sort of a sense of the climate of the course and their experience with me as their teacher for an academic year. And Ben said this to me. He said, Mr. Kuhn, your tendency is that when you get frustrated with us that we're not learning, that learning doesn't look like what you want it to look like, you become extremely pedantic and you just like pour on your inner geek, and you end up confusing us more. And his words, not mine, he said, you need to return us to the womb and, do your templates where we're using our crayons and the hungry hippos and gamifying things, Kerplunk, the Rubik's Cube, things of that nature. He said, that's how I learned best, is when you gamified and really got into your bag of tricks with your edutainment things. And I said, all right, I really got to heed that there, because we know that there's a trifecta in terms of things that preclude kids from learning. The cell phone, ChatGPT, cheating, and then ever since, the advent of COVID, there's an engagement gap. Kids are really disengaged. But I think there's a fourth thing in the trinity there. It's focus. Students don't focus as well as they used to. So I know when I get into these gimmicky kind of things that engagement goes up, the cell phones go away, and the writing becomes really, really good. So thanks to Ben, I have this focus template called Bringing the Band Back Together. And what I'll do is I'll walk you through the entire essay. I have 4 introductions that use my inverted thesis template, and then I have 2 body paragraphs where we're going to employ my template of the syllogistic method, and then I'll show you some sentence stems to wrap up the conclusion paragraph. And basically the analogy is this, that cobbling an essay together is kind of like assembling the parts of a band. And Ben, even though he's going to be a future president, he'll be like a la Bill Clinton. He's a phenomenal musician and talented actor. And so hats off to Ben for coming up with this idea. So without further ado, let me give you kind of the background for this and tell you how to set it up. I, in terms of Bob Rossing my instruction, am going to use George Harrison's Here Comes the Sun from the Abbey Road album, Beatles' Abbey Road, and then John Lennon's Come Together. And what I'll do is I'll show you how to write the essays for those two songs, just to demystify things for you and your students. And I told my students, the kind of, I'm sure you guys probably say the same, that some song lyrics are really poetic, and you can teach poetry via song lyrics. So I'm telling my students, choose any song that you really like, well, and that you think you could do a rich analysis of. So I found in running this already that some songs lack meaning, and students discover that, in the midst of this. So something of substance, something with a little pith and substance to it tends to work. So with that said, let's start at the beginning. Student is staring at their blank screen. Student is staring at their blank sheet of paper, and they intuitively ask the question, so how do I write the introductory paragraph? Before I answer that question, I always say this when I'm working with teachers, whether or not I'm working with them at the National Writing Project or doing my own consulting work. you got to Bob Ross your instruction, just like what you're going to see me do here. So I'm going to get to my proverbial easel and canvas and paint a whole bunch of introductions, body paragraphs, and conclusion paragraphs with you. This is my writing. I wrote these for my students. And like Bob Ross, when he would go into the joy of painting and give us a lesson for that particular episode, he painted the landscape for us, with us, and we would approximate what he was doing. So there's a major difference, seismic difference between the assigning of writing and the explicit teaching of it. And I strongly encourage teachers to position themselves as the expert writers in the classroom. Get to that proverbial easel canvas and write with your students. So for this one, as I said, I'm using those two songs, and students can't use Come Together and Here Comes the Sun. So to kind of minimize the mimicry and the stealing and the thievery, they can't use those two songs. So I'm keeping the prompt very generic, and I'm just going to say perform literary analysis of said song. And if we were to steal the language of like a typical FRQ1 or FRQ2 from the AP literature exam and create a prompt kind of in the vein of that discourse, implicit in the prompt, you're going to have two questions. What is the authorial and what is the author's intent, and how does the author construct meaning? Some of you are familiar with my work and you've seen me do this before. So you can ask those questions in every literary analysis and every rhetorical analysis. So what is the author's intent, and how does the author construct meaning? If the student reads the lyric properly, they ascertain the meaning properly, then they are going to guarantee themselves the thesis point. But here's the kicker. There's a progression to this. So let's visually take a look at this template and talk about the inverted thesis. So for literary analysis, I always have my students invert the thesis. So AP literature teachers, I'm talking FRQ 1, 2, and 3. This template works. So my students for AP literature always invert the thesis. Here's what this looks like. It's going to be 4 sentences long. My introductions are always 4 sentences long across the expository modes. So 4 sentences. The first 3 sentences answer the question, what is the authorial intent? And that's the context and background. So no plot summation, no cliff note summary, just what is the author's intent? And sometimes teachers might ask that question in the following way, like what's the universal theme? What's the universal truth? What's the exigence? I say authorial intent. So that's going to take 3 sentences. In an inverted thesis paradigm, you end with the thesis. And whenever the student is answering the question, how does the author construct meaning? As soon as you drop your terms, devices, techniques, that's the thesis statement. So that's why we're calling this inverted, because you end with the thesis statement. So there's other integral things that go into this triangle. Tier 2 level vocabulary. I mean, your average run-of-the-mill SAT caliber words, right? You got to cop a certain academic, discourse in academic writing. I want my students to augment their vocabulary a little bit, sound natural, don't be contrived, don't be overly pedantic or pretentious, but a little bit of tier 2 level vocabulary. And my students, go through my intensive word study academy from day one. I got hundreds of exercises to help them augment their vocabulary. So the other thing is sentence constructs. I use a manual. It's free. You can find it online. It's called Strunk and White's Write It Right. And I've created quite literally hundreds and thousands of exercises around their seminal work. And one thing they call it rule number 18. And in rule number 18, they posit that there's 12 different ways to cobble together a single sentence. So my students know all of the 12 sentence constructs. They know the parts of speech, and they're like syntactical ninjas. In order to get voice, rhythm, and flow at the AP level, we talk about the sophistication point. In order for that to happen, students need to manipulate their syntax with purpose and intent in order to get that voice, rhythm, and flow. flow. So I'm going to model how to do that in my exemplars and models. I find that struggling and emerging writers tend to use two sentence constructs, the independent clause and the short, simple declarative sentence. And they just parallel all their sentences to the point where, as we've read papers over the course of our careers, I'm sure you've experienced this. It sounds like da-dot, 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 the student's writing, right? Da-dot, da-dot, da-dot. It has that very droning flow. It's because they're paralleling their sentence constructs. So I teach my students how to avoid that. And as I already said, it's going to be exactly 4 sentences. So just to recap this, 3 plus 1, 3 authorial intent, 1 construction of meaning. All right, so as I said earlier, I'm going to take a look at a couple of lyrics from my favorite album, the Abbey Road. And I'm going to start with George Harrison's classic ditty, Here Comes the Sun. And I'll show you 2 examples with Here Comes the Sun and then 2 from Come Together. So hopefully seeing it 4 times, it will demystify it for you. So here's number 1. I'm just going to read it and then I'll unpack all the essential band members and instruments that go into this. So the 4 seasons are not just cycles of weather denoted on the square of a calendar. Nature's cycles are also part and parcel of being human and is in everything from our moods and the ebbs and flows of daily life. But here's the thing. It's all a circle. Dark days are not permanent, which George Harrison reminds us of metaphorically in his song, Here Comes the Sun. So I think you all might look at that and say, wow, that's a really good intro. I like that. But let's dissect it, right? Let's really break it down and assemble the band. So I use this analogy with this, band camp bringing back together the band, that the introductory paragraph is kind of like your announcement. Hey, I'm starting a garage band. Hey, let's get the band back together. You really need a thesis before you can orchestrate all the lines of reasoning that go into the composition of a body paragraph. So when we're assembling the band, we really need this introductory paragraph to be relatively flawless. So we got 3 sentences of authorial intent. 1 sentence construction of meaning. There's tier 2 level vocabulary in there. The sentence structures are very supple. They're very fluid, and it's exactly 4 sentences. I've color coded this for you guys just to break it down. So let's look at this again. So you can see my first 3 sentences are the authorial intent. I've colored that in red. The tier 2 level vocabulary is in black, and the construction of meaning, thesis, statement, sentence, last, the 4th sentence, is in green. So let's take it from the top again. The 4 seasons are not just cycles of weather denoted on the squares of a calendar. I kind of call that like the Jesus moment in the introductory paragraph, the aha, the big, like, why did Harrison write this song? What's his intent? What's his truth? And then you just unpack it with 2 more sentences. Nature's cycles are also part and parcel of being human and is in everything from our moods and the ebbs and flows of daily life. But here's the thing. It's all a circle. Note this last sentence. Students often think that they need to have a literary terms dumping ground, and I tell my students, focus on the 1 or 2. Sometimes it can be 3 if it's a really juicy piece that is up for analysis, but usually 1 or 2 of the most salient terms in the piece. And in Harrison, it's the extended metaphor. So look at this. Dark days are not permanent, which George Harrison reminds us of. And then you got to say the word metaphorically in his song, Here Comes the Sun. Exactly 4 sentences. Note the sentence constructs in here. My students are really good with expressive syntax. They know how to use dashes. And as a poet myself, I'm very guilty of overdoing the dash. And my students end up picking up that habit from me. But as long as they're using it correctly, it doesn't matter. So you have that third sentence there with the dash. You have some short, simple declarative sentences, parentheticals, a good variety of sentence structures. One of the things I don't like to see in introductions, really in any part of the essay, unless you're hammering the point, like in a conclusion of the syllogism, is parallelism. I think that yields that dot rhythm that we're trying to break kids of. So that one is done very well. All right, might be confusing, and this is why we have to Bob Ross our instruction. Let's do that again and see exemplar number 2. Same song, Here Comes the Sun. Let's just write it again and follow the exact same template, 3+1, tier 2 sentence constructs, and see what happens. And again, I've color-coded this one for you. There are endless interconnected cycles in life. Everything from the literal seasons, our moods, and even the general ups and downs of daily life all have analogous seasons. But one human tendency is to assume that the dark seasons will exist in perpetuity without end. Now we're at the construction of meaning sentence. Got to drop the terms. George Harrison, however, in his song, Here Comes the Sun, reminds us that all of life's darkness will one day be restored to happy light. And you can imply the terms, the devices, the techniques. So in the implication there, you got a sense that we're dealing with some kind of juxtaposition or binary between light and dark imagery. You got the implication of the metaphor, the symbolism, the imagery. So you don't necessarily need to say it. I know some AP Lit teachers are emphatic and they're like, you got to say it, otherwise you don't get the thesis point. And I've taught at the college level for 21 years, and I like it. I think it's more sophisticated when students imply. But I know the risk is on the AP Literature exam that implication might be construed as no thesis. So as an AP Lit teacher, I tell my guys drop the terms. But I think this is a really sophisticated way to do it. So you can see here, good verbiage. You got interconnected, analogous, perpetuity, restored. So I do like to see some tier 2. Don't overdo it. And again, the 3+1, and note the sentence constructs. So nothing runs parallel, and everything's altered with purpose and effect. All right, let's switch songs and go to John Lennon's very complicated, very paradoxical song, Come Together. Even though we have a new song, we're changing our text. We are going to follow that 3+1 rhythm. And here it is from the top. Judgment is a human flaw that can run rampant if left unchecked. But the mindful judger will inevitably come to a singular conclusion. Man is inextricably connected to man, no matter the abundance of apparent differences. In judging others, one finds another's loose threads and begins to pull. But these threads belong to all of humanity, not just the individual being falsely critiqued. So we're 3 sentences of unpacking the authorial intent. Note this last sentence and the placement of the terms, devices, techniques. John Lennon highlights this phenomenon through the characterization of his protagonist and the many paradoxes that are seated in his song Come Together. Right. So ultimately, we're going to get to my main analogy here in the focus template for teaching line of reasoning. You really need to have a thesis that arrives at authorial intent and construction of meaning in order to even have any hopes of sustaining a cogent line of reasoning in the body paragraphs. So this template of the inverted thesis really works nice here. Again, note the tier 2. I've highlighted it in black. The first 3 sentences in red are the authorial intent, and the blue sentence is construction of meaning. So that is done, very well from top to bottom here. That's really nice. So let's do it one more time just to totally demystify it. It is human tendency to look upon another person and feel a sense of superiority. Again, I like it when students cut to the chase. Like, that's the whole exigence of the song. That's the breath, right? That's the main idea. So I like that. Taking stock of another individual is a common shared trait. But the mindful among us realizes something key in these moments of scornful judgment. The observer and the observed are one and the same. Instead of using our eyes to denigrate and tear apart other individuals, one should find the common thread and celebrate in those unifying factors. We're at the construction of meaning sentence. In his song Come Together, John Lennon emphasizes these points with his wordplay, diction, and interlacing paradoxical statements. So you can see there that one used two, and that's kind of the whole mojo of the song is, that really awkward wordplay and then the paradoxical statements. So you drop your thesis in the most salient terms. So you got tendency, superiority, scornful, denigrate, unify, interlacing. Students always ask me questions like, how many tier 2 level words do I need in an introduction? I don't know. When I'm Bob Rossing these, I tend to have 3, 4, something like that. But again, they have to stay in their lane. They have to stay in their wheelhouse. So if it doesn't sound natural, if it sounds contrived or forced, then that ain't going to work. So the student really needs to figure out where their vocal vantage point is, and kind of become a writer and assess that. So just to recap here, as we're assembling the parts of our band, 3 sentences equal authorial intent, 1 sentence construction of meaning, tier 2 sentence constructs, 4 sentences, and that'll do it every single time. So if you're painting with me, this is probably a good place to pause. Have your students, choose their lyrics and crank out an introductory paragraph. Workshop them, peer edit them, have many eyes on them, because I'm a firm believer that the more writing students see, the better they become. So our next question is this. All right, and now we're getting into the main lesson of this writing workshop video. How do I write the body paragraphs? And more importantly, how do I sustain a cogent line of reasoning? Many of you are familiar with my template of the syllogistic method, so I'm going to fly through this one really quick and just kind of cut to the chase here. So it's rooted in the Aristotelian tradition. And when Aristotle was running his school at the Lyceum, they would often throw out these juicy essential questions like, what is justice? Which is the essential question of the seminal text, Plato's Republic. And he made the observation, he had this eureka moment, like, oh, hey, my really good orators, they have like a mathematical computative precision in their logic, and that's why they crush their arguments. And the same goes for our students. You have to have logic. That's what line of reasoning really is logic. So he said to house one's logic, just go syllogistically. And all that means is you're going premise, premise, conclusion. So I'll give you an example here. If I were to say premise number 1, arsenic is deadly. Premise 2, my dog ate arsenic. Conclusion, my dog is going to die. Aristotle would use one of his favorite words. He would call that a cogent argument. It's bulletproof. It's lockstep. It makes complete sense. It's indisputable, irrefutable. And when our students write, we want them to be that computative, that mathematical, and have all the parts of logic there. So how do we turn this into a template for the purposes of constructing a literary analysis body paragraph? So the syllogistic method will look like this. First, I'm going to say this. A syllogistic body paragraph is 10 to 12 sentences. Those little itty bitty 4 or 5 sentence baggers that students write, it's really hard to get a fully fleshed out line of reasoning in that. There's not enough support. There's not enough analysis in 4 or 5 sentences to really flesh out an argument. So I'm saying 10 to 12. The first 3 sentences, and I'm going to model this for you. This is where we gather our instruments. The first 3 sentences are going to be the first premise, and this is an argument containing terms, devices, techniques. We are engaged in expository writing, and all exposition is an argument, so I really hammer this point, this concept with my students. You got to argue, right? No plot summation. We're not writing plot analysis, we're writing literary analysis. So this first premise is crucial to meet the demands of the assignment. You got to keep that argument central. So I like 3 sentences. Beginning at the 4th sentence is the second premise. And this is where the textual support comes into play. And I like to see a teeter-totter balance of quoting and paraphrasing. I don't want to see one done far more at the expense of the other. And then the kicker here, and I really want to articulate this clearly. Syllogistic body paragraphs need conclusions. You need to conclude the paragraph. And of course, you need a conclusion at the end of the essay, but your paragraphs likely need to conclude. So this is like a 2-sentence move where you have a link and echo, or like you keep the promise of the first premise. So syllogisms kind of come full circle on each other. And that like I said, that's all going to take like 10 to 12 sentences. And I'll model that a few times for you just to really demystify it for you. So the main thing here in this lesson that I run with students is this concept that logic has a sequence. And it's kind of like assembling a band. And that's what we're going to do here. So I have for you a line of reasoning sticker board. I print this slide, and I just made it in Canva, and I print it on cardstock for my students. And I give them a pair of scissors and some glue or some tape. And if they're going to have a line of reasoning, these stickers, these instruments are going to appear in their essay. And that might sound a little weird and a little wonky, but I will demonstrate for you from top to bottom how this is going to work. So basically you have these instruments here: microphone, guitar, drums, trumpet, pianos, the keys. You need to find the players. So we're going to drop these instruments. Well, the microphone's not an instrument, so we're going to drop these things in the first premise, and then we're going to go find a singer. We're going to find a pianist. We're going to find, the dude that plays the trumpet, the dude that plays the guitar, and the drummer in the second premise. And I will show you how to do that right now, beginning with the first premise. So as we said, it's going to be 3 sentences long. Students often ask this question: where do I begin? And I tell them, indicate to your reader that you have a chronology and that you have a sequence, because that's essential to line of reasoning. So within my template, there's a sentence stem, and it's this: right from the onset, comma. So if you are writing with me, jot that down. Those 4 words plus the comma. Right from the onset, comma. That cues your reader into knowing that you are going to be very methodic and sequential in this. You're starting where the author starts. And that's a great practice, right? In order to establish your line of reasoning, is just have a pecking order. So I put the microphone next to that sentence stem, right? And later on in the second premise, the singer is going to pick up that microphone. You'll see that in just a second. So right from the onset, Harrison symbolically equates the sunnier seasons of life with happiness. So the guitar is going to be attached to symbolism. Again, you got to remember that we're arguing with terms, devices, techniques. So the guitar is assigned to symbolism. Given life's cyclic nature, periods of cold dormancy are natural, but long at last the sun's metaphoric rays invariably return to illumine what was once dark and despairing. Winters, literal and figurative, can seem to drag on forever, but the season that brings warmth and happiness will also and always cycle back. So the drum is going to get into connotative, denotative, literal, figurative diction. So we got right from the onset, microphone. We need a singer for that. We have a guitar for symbolism. And then we have the literal, figurative, connotative, denotative diction is the drum. All right, let's break this down and go real slow because this is abstract. In order to have a flawless first premise, right, you need to have your instruments, which are your lit terms. You have to use my stem or some stem to indicate that you have chronology. And then I like it when students multitask and have a few instruments, like 2 or 3. Oftentimes, students will go, one paragraph tone, one paragraph diction, one paragraph syntax. You're totally precluding yourself from the sophistication point, even in an on-level class, let alone AP. That's not skillful. So it has to be exactly 3 sentences, and know what does not go in there. No quotes, no summary, no plot. So let's do this all together here. All right. I tell my students at the end of your first premise, go quote hunting. So we have a microphone. We need a quote and or paraphrase for that. We have a guitar. We need a quote and or paraphrase for the guitar. And we have a drum. We need a quote and or paraphrase for that. If we are to keep the promise of the first premise, we need quotes and or paraphrases for the microphone, the guitar, and the drum. All right, just to recap, 3 sentences, literary argument. You have to have your terms, devices, techniques in there. So let's hop all the way to the second premise and get rolling here. I have another stem, and it's one word, immediately, comma. We're going to bring our singer in to pick up the microphone right there because we're going back to right from the onset. And in the 4th sentence, I tell my students, begin to quote and begin to paraphrase. So look at how the immediately picks up the microphone. So check this out. Immediately, it is clear that the mere arrival of the sun can make one break out in happy little ditties of do-do-do-do. All right, we have a quote that aligns to the right from the onset, so the singer can pick up the microphone. We still have the guitar and the drums, right? We have to talk about symbolism, literal and figurative, connotative, denotative diction, and we need quotes and or paraphrases in order for the musicians to pick up their instruments and begin to play. So check this out. You quote, you got to analyze. As seasons shift from cold darkness to light warmth, whether the seasons be literal or figurative, the sun can make the smiles return to their faces. All right, so now we're getting into that literal and figurative stuff that we were talking about. But I want to talk about a template within the template. That quote transition there was pretty silky smooth. And there's a hack for this. I call it the 5-word rule. If a student places a minimum of 5 words in front of a quote and keeps the quote relatively small, it should sound conversational. But note in that quote that I used a bracket. So in order to be conversational, you got to teach your kids to bracket and get out of that habit of dropping the period and then dumping the quote immediately after that. So yet again, we quoted, we analyzed. So check this out. Literally, especially for those who live in climates where the winter brings much cold and dark weather, these initial days of spring have one uttering things like, it seems like years since it's been here. And again, you see that 5-word rule at play. So we're really tearing apart the literal and the figurative, the connotative and the denotative significance of the diction here. So that guitar player is a strumming a real nice song. Humans are sunbeams. We need the sun. So after a long absence, one sighs and says, it's all right. But figuratively, with regards to man's internal seasons of happiness and sadness, long bleak days eventually give way to sunshine as well. All right, now we're back to what the drummer promised us, right? So we can drop that drummer. He's playing now. Things like grief and depression are analogous to winter, and happiness and joy are ascribed to seasons of spring and summer. The refrain joyfully sings, sun, 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 here it comes. Upon its return, one rejoices. All right, so you see in red there at the bottom, it says continued. That's just the second premise. We have to add our 2-sentence conclusion. It usually takes like 2 or 3 sentences to conclude this. We're getting towards 10 to 12 sentences, so we got to wrap it up. But let's just revisit this real quick. All right. I like to have a stem that ties back to the right from the onset. So this, in this I used immediately. You have to align the quotes with the terms, devices, and techniques. So like have the musicians pick up their instruments. I like to see that 5-word rule and then still the same stuff we were talking about in the introduction. Sentence constructs, supple, fluid, tier 2 level vocab, and 10 to 12 sentences. So let me show you how to wrap this up here. And again, you're just coming full circle back to the prompt, back to the thesis, keep the promise of the first premise. Echoes, links, promises. So this is how I would end the body paragraph, the first body paragraph. Breaking winter's spell, metaphoric or not, will definitely raise a smile to one's face and bring about a restorative quality. Seasons run the grand cosmic wheel endlessly, and no matter what, the sun always returns to reveal its face. So that took 13 sentences. It's okay if you go over. That, my friends, is what Aristotle would call a supercogent argument. The line of reasoning is 100% intact from start to finish. So, you think you throw it in AP terms, student writes like that on the exam, they're going to get a 6. Right, that's a really good quality literary analysis. Vocab up, sentence structure is really nice, line of reasoning's all there. It's sophisticated all day long. And this little device here of dropping the instruments in the first premise and then having the musicians pick up their instruments and play is really, really cool. So can we see that again? So I'm going to show you how to do it with Come Together. And again, I'll show you how to do the first body paragraph, and then when I'm done with this, I'll show you how to tack on the other body paragraphs. So just to really hammer this home, let's do the exact same thing. So my first premise for Come Together is going to begin with right from the onset. Again, do you see that? So have a chronology, have a methodical order to your progression. So we're going to drop the microphone there. And then in the fourth sentence, we're going to begin with the word immediately, comma, to go pick up that microphone. Right from the onset, Lenin highlights all the apparent oddball characteristics of his protagonist while sizing him up. Enumerating the individual's long list of apparent flaws, the irony becomes clear. We are all one by virtue of our flaws and desire to be free. The nonsensical diction simply accentuates the ludicrous nature of man's liberal willingness to toss judgment without reflection. Or I cut a word off there, without reflection or discernment. I cut a word off there. So we can see here, guitar is going characterization, drum irony, trumpet diction right from the onset, right, for the chronology is going to be our singer. So now we need for the musicians to pick up the guitar, the drums, the trumpet, the microphone. We need quotes and or paraphrases for all of those things. So again, I'm going to follow the exact same pattern as I did for Here Comes the Sun for the first body paragraph. So I'm going to say immediately to tie it back to right from the onset. Fourth sentence, get quoting, paraphrasing. So look at this. Immediately, Lenin dichotomizes the narrator and the protagonist through loaded judgments that cast the subject as having juju eyeball and hair down to his knees while he come grooving up slowly. I'm going to pause it there for a second. Let's go back to that 5-word rule. This is really sophisticated right here. I quoted 3 times in one sentence. I really like to see students not necessarily do it 3 times, that's a lot, but 2 times in one sentence. When you're in contention for the sophistication point in an AP setting, I think showing your quoting chops like that bodes really well for you. I've read thousands and thousands of sample papers, that AP Lang students write. And I don't see a lot of students do this, but it's really sophisticated and it can be taught. And that 5-word rule bodes well. So the singer can pick up the microphone. We're good. We quoted. We analyze. The diction teeters upon being colloquial, which it is at times, but then it trespasses into the absurd while noting that the one being judged has things such as toe jam football and walrus gumboot. So I'm showing my students how to do this double quote thing here. So I'm kind of overdoing it, but I'm just modeling, Bob Rossing how to do it. And you can see there, the guitarist can pick up his guitar because we're keeping the promise of that first premise. We have quotes and or paraphrases that align to the guitar. We're perfect. Clearly, these citations against the individual make no sense. And this is Lenin's point. It is human tendency to take another's inventory, but the irony, so now we can pick up that trumpet. We got to, get the quote in there as well, or the paraphrase. But the irony in the situation is that in doing so, one overlooks the obvious. Mankind needs less judgment and more coming together. The protagonist seems to be of this mindset because he say, I know you, you know me. And again, 5-word rule, always for the quotes. Man is I can't, my trumpet's on that. Man is just much with feet below his knees and a bunch of muddy water floating in the mind from the day's trials and tribulations. Passing reckless judgment is a social construct. So is knowing that 1 and 1 and 1 is 3. But the irony is this: while man might be smart, it takes street smarts to look beyond the apparent differences and come together as one. So you can see here, the whole band's playing together. So like the drummer is playing with the trumpeter, playing with the guitarist, playing with the singer. This is all working. So I like it when the quotes, the paraphrases all sing together. They have to touch hands with each other. And that's a really hard concept for kids to grasp. And I like this analogy here of the band camp, of bringing the band back together, because they can see here, it's not, you just can't quote dump and you can't literary terms dump. Everything needs to be unified. And especially at the AP level, this is essential. And this is a nice, clear way to show how that works. So just to wrap this up here, but the irony is this: while man might be smart, it takes street smarts to look beyond the apparent differences and come together as one. While we might look upon another with our ridiculous judgment that really don't know a thing and see things like Ono sideboard and Mojo filter, all we really need to be seen is the universal yeah, that all is one. All right, so that's the end of the second premise. Again, let's throw a conclusion on this bad boy. And again, this just takes 2, sometimes 3 sentences. Just wrap it up, echo back to the prompt, the thesis, keep the promise of the first premise. This is the thing. The divides that humans make are totally unnecessary. Instead of seeing division, see unity. Instead of scorn, see the eyes that love and acceptance. And that'll do it. That's, again, 10 to 12 sentences. That's, again, Aristotle would say a very cogent argument. The line of reasoning stays perfectly intact there. So as students write their own, they can glue or tape down the stickers that I noted earlier, and really just kind of have this built-in graphic organizer, this mnemonic, to make sure that they're keeping everything super locked in and connecting the dots in their line of reasoning. All right, so we have the intro and the first body paragraph done. So we have to ask ourselves this question: what do I do next? And it's easy. You bust out another syllogism. So my students write 4-paragraph essays, and I know some teachers lose their mind when I say this. If you're writing 10 to 12 sentence body paragraphs, there's no need for that third body paragraph, the 5-paragraph essay, especially for AP exams. For AP Language and AP Lit, my students only do 4 paragraphs: intro, 2 bodies, conclusion. So for Here Comes the Sun and Come Together, in terms of chronologically proceeding through there, in each instance, we're at the middle of the song. So what we're going to do is reload the syllogism. We're going to change our terms, devices, techniques, and focus on the middle, or where we left off, and have that 3-sentence first premise. We're going to pause and go quote hunting to make sure that we have the promise of the first premise. We're going to write that first premise, glue down our instruments, and then we're going to go find the quotes and the paraphrases for those instruments so that the band members can all come together. And it's going to be exactly 4 paragraphs: intro, 2 bodies, conclusion. So let's wrap this essay up and talk about conclusions, right? So I have a poster in my room with 15-sentence stems for conclusions that we use for all the expository modes. So for lit analysis, rhetorical analysis, argument, persuasion, synthesis, and even research. And I'll model a couple of them for you here. One of the go-tos for lit analysis is simply said, comma. And I liken it to this. So kids have gone and seen fireworks displays in the town where I'm at. We always have a big 4th of July celebration, and then homecoming, we have fireworks, and you have the grand finale. And at the end of the essay, the conclusion of the essay is always like a grand finale. And it's just grand finale of theme, 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 focus on the theme, hammer the thesis. So this takes 3 to 4 sentences and simply said, comma, just re-encapsulates the whole essay. So look what I did for Here Comes the Sun. Simply said, no matter how bleak one's life is, it's all just passing weather. No season and no mood and no situation is permanent. Everything comes and goes like seasons and fickle weather. In dark times, one must remember that the sun will soon return. And that's it. That's a perfect conclusion right there. You don't have to overdo it. I know some YouTube pundits want like 7, 8, 9, 10 sentences, like a whole other body paragraph. I disagree with that. So especially in time situations for AP exams, as an example, you don't have time for that. And it's really unnecessary, and it's just wasted verbiage. Like for me, it's the kids kind of bloviating if they go above and beyond that. So here's a peek at 2 other sentence stems that students use to wrap up their conclusions. In no other words and beyond a shadow of a doubt. So you can see they're just grand finale kind of words, clauses to make sure that they're ending with a thematic bang. So I'm at the end here. I hope this serves you well. Happy teaching, happy writing. And for those that want to get in touch with me or be added to my email mailing list, I have a blog. I mail it out once a week, and I offer a lot of free goodies. If you want to get on that mailing list, email me at teachingwritingcoach@gmail.com. I'll be happy to send you those weekly mailings. And then I also am a lead teacher at the National Writing Project, and we have PD offerings throughout the entire calendar year. So if you want to learn about some of our PDs, which not even in my opinion, my research, the National Writing Project has the most affordable PD on the planet. We are the cheapest by far. And the other thing is, for those of you needing professional development hours, they are very generous in awarding hours. So if you want to learn more about our PD offerings, go to my webpage, www.teachinghowtowrite.com. And up in the main menu, it says My NWP Courses. Click on that, and you'll see everything that we're currently offering. And if you have any questions about those PD courses, feel free to give me a message at teachingwritingcoach@gmail.com. All right, I hope this serves you well. It's playful, it's fun, it's edutainment, it's gamification to some extent. And I hope your kids learn a ton by manipulating and pulling the strings of this template. Be well and take care.